One of the places in the world that, in terms of megaliths, I've I've always wanted to visit, I probably never will because it's so far away and so expensive, is Easter Island. When I first saw those statues as a kid in a book on ancient mysteries, it was one of those things that was like, oh, here we go. This is like, I'm attracted to this for a reason. I'm drawn to this for a reason. This means something for a reason. The almost modern art stylistic look of the statues, the way they towered over the landscape. I just couldn't understand how the manpower and the resources were gathered together on such a tiny island to create these artworks. And then you had the likes of Eric von Daniken came along saying that they were spacemen, aliens, and all this stuff, this nonsense, this gaslighting. And that, although on other levels, von Daniken did open up people to think differently. So although he was full of shit with the whole aliens thing, it brought us to where we have people like Graham Hancock asking questions about the real history of humanity now, and myself, to a much lesser degree. But the statues themselves, I remember when I was a kid, the BBC had a TV documentary series called Horizon, and they did this special on the statues of Easter Island with a whole theory about it. It was very exciting and very well filmed and very well made. And the theory they presented was that there was two warring tribes on the island, if I can remember. And in order to win the war against the others, they built these pagan statue gods until eventually there were no gods left. There was nothing left on the island, and they all starved. And it became like the Wicker Man story, where they, were burning more and more locals. That kind of concept. And I didn't believe that because it just didn't make any sense, even as a kid. So then, in recent years, it's one of the things that's completely hidden from the public, really, is that the statues go all the way down to their feet. And they're also standing on large, heavy stone plinths. And they're buried very deep down. And they say that it's volcanic ash, that's why they're buried up, and it happened really quickly. That is not volcanic ash, that's clay. If you look at those pictures of that where they've been dug down to their feet, that is clay. That is organic material. Those statues have been there for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Not a few hundred years or and then been buried with ash from a volcano. That is clay. That is organic decayed matter from ancient forests and ancient woodlands and ancient everything living, suggesting that Easter Island was once a very, very different place. And then a few years ago, National Geographic, what can only be described as scientific gaslighting, if not outright scientific fraud, proved how they could move the statues by using ropes and rocking them along a road, but conveniently only have the statues up to here. They didn't show the bottoms, and they knew there was bottoms down there, but they had to keep the public ignorant and profane. Remember, you're dealing with a lot of Freemasons involved in this stuff. You look on the internet for photographs of the Easter Island statues' bodies to go down to their feet. There's almost none. And more tantalizingly, the backs of them have graphics and glyphs on them. And you cannot get a decent source for any of these graphics or glyphs. They're completely hidden. And if we were a real scientific society that genuinely cared about the past rather than trying to keep the biblical time frame going, and things like, Darwinism, the scientists would be down there digging out those statues and recording everything on the backs of the statues, the glyphs and try to translate them. They're hiding them for a reason. They're hiding them because of two things. They don't want the public realizing that they're buried up to their chests in organic matter, and that proves how ancient they are and how long they've been sitting on the landscape. And they also don't want people thinking about things like giants. giants have to have been real, and I think one of the reasons for this was changes in gravity. If you look at the statue of you go to Malta, it's called Giants this, Giants that, and there's some of like the Temple of Gigantea, and Gozo, which I'll be going back to soon, and the folk legends from Sicily are that a race of giants used to live on Malta before the humans, the regular people, arrived in the Neolithic. And there's the famous statue that was taken from the Hypogeum Halsafalini in Malta, in Palo. I think it's in Palo, is it? Well, around that area. And it's an overweight woman lying, and it's called the Sleeping Lady. And you've heard my belief or my theory. That's a giant. She's dying, and she's being remembered fondly by the last of the humans. There's also at the Targen Temple, I'll show you there I'll show you that again when I get there later on in the year, a statue of the lower half of another woman, and the fat on her legs are bowed down. My theory is that gravity changed and the giants vanished. They died out. They couldn't handle anymore. But there seems to be a suggestion that humans took care of them. It's like this weird thing that humans were fondly remembered them, that they were almost like childlike and innocent. And I think those statues at Easter Island tell us a story about the history of the world that's very, very different than the official narrative. Very, very different. And it's one place I hope, I doubt I'll ever get there, but it's one place that would really, I just have to see it with my own eyes, because I just find it amazing that all these islands around the world, Malta, Gozo, Sardinia, Easter Island, Ireland, are all filled with stories, and even maybe Iceland, that's what the ice giants were, of where giants lived, and giants built the ancient monuments. It's everywhere. Everywhere. And it's always an island, and it's always all the big things were built by, all the megaliths were built by. I saw one of a recent one that I visited in Sardinia a few years ago, a Neuragic giant's grave, they call it, on top of a mountain, and it was taken with a drone. And I've crawled all over this thing, crawled inside it. There's a photograph of me going around and me standing on top of it, my arms spread apart. And when you actually see the thing taken with a photograph from a drone, some Italian gentleman did, it is absolutely enormous and strange. It looks like the head of a bull. I've often believed that these Nuragis were not the towers, and the towers in Sardinia are also related to the Brochs, I'm convinced, in Scotland. And we've been lied. And then at Orkney, another island, and it just goes on and on and on and on and on. And Easter Island has a monumental secret to holding there for us to be found. And there's days I want, and this is why you're not even allowed to touch those statues on Easter Island. You go to jail. They lock up in the local jail. There's days if I had an army, I'd invade Easter Island with a load of JCB diggers and dig up the backs of those statues and finally do what the scientists and the authorities won't do and record those glyphs. Because Easter Island is like a Rosetta Stone of the hidden history of humanity, and that's why they gaslight us scientifically and lie to us constantly about this place. Because I get the impression if they could have dynamited those statues years ago to hide them, they would have. That's half the reason why you had all these puritanical Christians, stone killers, destroying megaliths all over the place. I mean, we don't know before the Abrahamics came, there could have been complex carvings on the likes of Stonehenge or, everywhere. I mean, we only know about the ones at Newgrange is because they were buried, but they didn't know about them. But how many of those things have been found and been destroyed or flipped over? That's another one. If a stone has specific carvings on it, where possible, they've turned them upside down so to bury the carvings. You've also seen I've shown photographs of it, of the Ormstones at University College Cork. They're held like prisoners in the dungeon. It's really creepy and weird. And if you talk to any academic about what is Ormstones, oh, they're Christian genealogies or they're Christian stories. Of the 300 known Ormstones in Ireland, only 10 or so have Christian inscriptions on them. 290 relate to either family genealogies or pagan mythology. And the lies is staggering. It's like James Joyce said that Irish history is a nightmare from which I'm trying to escape. Well, the history of humanity as presented to us by academia and religion is a form of, not a nightmare. I would go further. I would say it is a deliberately imposed sleep paralysis experience imposed upon the collective consciousness of humanity. Keep an eye on Easter Island and pay careful attention, because I've got news for you. They're either going to try and hide that thing, or we're going to find out the greatest secrets ever, but they'll do it slowly, and they will. Don't believe their narrative ever.